The US is a weird place right now. Pretty much everyone is unhappy for one reason or another, and in many cases, folks are justified in their frustration. Our political system, which was already pretty flawed, is being put to the test by extreme partisanship, divisive individuals making questionable decisions with dubious goals, and an incredible disparity in wealth and access to resources among the voting populace. And right about now, you're wondering what any of that has to do with the children's card game we love, Magic the Gathering. So I'll get to the point. The idea here is to analyze the seemingly constant strife and rival ideologies among Ravnica's guilds and draw parallels to the unrest in America. Specifically, I want to look at progressive protests and movements calling for the defunding of police departments and radical reform of law enforcement in our nation, and the attitudes of a certain bunch of red-green clans that call Ravnica home. Granted, it's by no means going to be a one-to-one comparison, but there are poignant parallels between the fictional struggles of the story and those occurring today in our nation. I'm calling it the Gruul, the Raze, and Domri, Destroying to Rebuild. And before you roll your eyes and hit the back button to search for the magic content you actually want, let me tease you with this. There will be a little nonsense mixed in with the heavy stuff. Yeah, dude, you're my favorite planeswalker, everyone knows. But we'll get to you, crap for brains. Nice hair. Let's start by talking about Ravnica in general, how we get to the guild system, and with that, the loosely affiliated clans that will be our focus. See, you go back 10,000 years in the Plains history, and there's no trace of the Ecumenopolis we know and love. It's a savage plane, rife with violent and brutal conflicts between factions that predate the guilds by several millennia. The flavor text on Dissension's Magerite stone gives us a little insight.
The stones hark back to an age before civilization, when the living earth blessed all who trod its untamed wilds.
At some unknown time in this past, there came to be the Nephilim, who I mention here in part because they are fascinatingly weird. I mean, look at Witchmaw here and tell me you're not going to have nightmares. But also because they are sometimes lumped into a group known as Ravnica's Old Gods. It's a largely undefined group, but by most interpretations it includes two Peruns, Matselesnaya and Rakdos, as well as the biggest pigus himself, Ilharg the Razeboar, who is prophesied by the Gruul's Druids of the Old Ways as the bringer of the End-Raze. Getting ahead of myself, though. Back on our cursory jaunt through Ravnica's past, we see an end to the long period of chaos when Azor, the Sphinx Perun of the Azoria Senate, and a really big jerk, authors the Guild Pact, an ancient magical document signed by all of the Peruns that established the guild system we know. Among these guilds were the Red-Green Gruul, originally deemed the Plains' noble keepers of the wilds. Thing is, though, as the rest of the guilds steadily expanded the city and claimed more and more of the natural spaces to construct buildings and other public works, there was less and less for the Gruul to actually tend to. The flavor text on Guilds of Ravnica's maniacal rage puts it in plain terms.
They tell us the wilds are ours, then they brick them over. They can lie to our faces, but not to our fists.
This means the Gruul quickly become known as outsiders and eventually are more or less denied a seat at the table. Does that remind you of any real-world situations our society is attempting to reconcile today? Maybe we're onto something here. But it's time to fast forward a bit and talk about the development of the plane and the Gruul through the 3 blocks set on Ravnica. Whereas the other guilds may have some internal squabbles and divisions, none of them approach the level of disorganization of the Gruul. With their purpose and reason for being gone, they're now held together by really only their color identity and a contempt for the other guilds and the infrastructure they've put in place. Take a gander at Domri's quote on Ravnica Allegiance's Rubble Slinger for a simple distillation of this attitude.
Tear down the city, lie by lie. then throw it back at the liars, stone by stone.
On the subject of their divided front, it would be prudent to learn a little more about the clans themselves and their individual identities. Typically brought up first are the Burning Tree, the largest in numbers and also the fiercest, led originally by the Cyclops Borborygmos. Notably, the symbol we see most often associated with the Gruul as a whole, this little number, is actually the crest of the Burning Tree and not the other clans I'm about to discuss. Just another example of the Gruul being oversimplified and marginalized by the rest of Ravnica, but I digress. There's also the Scab clan, known as the most outright violent, led by the giant Narbolg Ninefingers. The Gore clan, an extremely aggressive group that follows the two-headed giant Rurik Thar, and the Bolrak clan, which is comprised of the heavies that really like tearing down all those pretty buildings everyone else spent so long putting together. The Slizik clan are mostly Viashino and are known as skulkers and stealthy tacticians, sort of outliers in a guild known for its raw strength. Then there's the Gravelhide clan, a relatively new bunch known for their toughness. Finally, rounding it out are the very interesting Zur-Ta clan, who adhere to the old ways, follow the centaur Nikya, worship the Utmunger, or gods of the deep earth, and await the return of Ilharg. Anyway, with that background established, let's discuss some important events and developments among the Gruul that we see during the time of Ravnica allegiance and War of the Spark. First, there's the fact that belief in the old ways is spreading. Totally not just a Zur-Ta thing anymore. Also, Domri's challenge and defeat of Borborygmos, the closest thing the Gruul had to a single figurehead, is given significant meaning by others in the clans. Straight from Ravnica Allegiance's Rhythm of the Wild.
Some view Domri's unlikely ascent as a sign of Ilharg the Razebolt's imminent return.
Ain't it funny how folks can cling to some wackadoodle ideas and make a big fuss over coincidences as they proclaim that certain completely unrelated events will or won't happen? But I'm going off on tangents again. Time to examine the Gruul mindset and way of life a bit. The long and short of it is that these guys and gals like to break stuff. Buildings, bridges, windows, Azorius lawmakers' faces. I mean, the Gruul-themed Ravnica Allegiance pre-release kits were emblazoned with the words,
Smash! Smash! Smash!
So, far be it from me to accuse them of false advertising. But it's important to look at why they so badly want to tear down the city and civilization. In part, it's because they see it as their duty. The clans were originally tasked with protecting the wilds, and all that pavement and masonry is encroaching on it. Also, for better or worse, it's in their nature. Many Gruul are of more aggressive and less civilized races. Goblins, giants, and ogres, to name a few. So it's kind of just what they do. The flavor text on Dragon's Maze's Gruul War Chant speaks to this.
We are the heart of the wild, the fire in its eyes, and the howl in its throat. Come, join the battle to which you were born.
However, it's not just a primal calling to wreck and ruin that drives them. There are larger ideals at play here too. The Gruul have been treated as inferiors by many of the other guilds, painted as savages, and made to feel worthless in their own world. Thus, their acts of destruction are personal expressions of liberty and righteous rebellion against oppression. Rurik Thar's quote on Gatecrash's burst of strength is informative here.
Our fight is not about territory or revenge. It is about freedom, plain and simple.
Nikya has this to say on the matter, from Gatecrash's Scar Goliath.
They bind us with their laws! We free ourselves with nature's fist!
So, seems there's a real, legitimate reason and purpose behind reducing entire city blocks to dust. Brings me to the first of the lessons we, as people who want to see change in our nation, can take from this fictional bunch of beasts and beings. We can and must act against injustice, and publicly express disagreement with the systems in place. Indeed, in certain situations, we have to actively resist so that wrongs can be righted. I love this quote from Domri on War of the Sparks Rubble Belt Rioters because it echoes this sentiment while also being really, really punk rock.
If the system is broken, break the system.
Another tenet of the Gruul that is perhaps not as obvious but no less important is their persistence and relentlessness. They realize that what they do on any given day, breaking laws and demolishing buildings, doesn't result in any overwhelming, decisive victories for their cause. In fact, the actions that any individual Gruul citizen takes may seem like random violence or inciting chaos for the sake of chaos. However, they believe that through collective effort, sheer tenacity, and a never-settle attitude, they can eventually achieve the outcomes they want. And that's another lesson we can take away from them. The idea that small accomplishments achieved by our movement and meager concessions by the establishment are just small steps, not the end goal. Forever, we must push forward, call for action, and demand that those in power listen and address the grievances we see around us. Take a look at the flavor text on Ravnica Allegiance's Gore Clan Wrecker as an example of this stick-to-itiveness.
Today, the rubble belt is a bit larger. That's a good day's work.
The speaker acknowledges that some small headway was made, but notes it was just one day's efforts, implying that tomorrow, more can be done. Reminds me of this beautiful and powerful phrase that came into the public consciousness when South Carolina quarterback Jay Urich wrote it on a sign and marched with his teammates in a Black Lives Matter protest. Matter is the minimum. Black lives are worthy. Black lives are beloved. Black lives are needed. Finally, before we get into some of the things the Gruul get wrong in their approach, one more positive takeaway. I gave a brief rundown of the different clans and their central qualities to both give you an idea of their loose structure, but also to make clear how diverse a group they really are and how each brings unique skills and strengths to the table. That's critical, because the same is true for us in the progressive camp. You may not be in the position where you can be on the front lines at demonstrations and rallies. Perhaps your role can be to support those who march by providing them with supplies. Or maybe you can share links on social media. Or discuss important issues with friends and family to help them learn. Or sit behind a microphone and make YouTube videos. Don't feel guilty for what you can't do, because there are so many, many wonderful things you can do, and every bit counts. Now, you could turn the video off here and slap on some war paint and go throw a rock through a window thinking you're part of the solution, but you're smarter than that. You know that the Gruul are completely made up, and most certainly not role models. And you know I'm not encouraging anyone to go damaging property or hurting others. Indeed, the clan's strategy for bringing about change via destruction lacks several key components when it comes to being realistic, effective, sustainable, and, well, safe. For starters, they're not a unified front. They don't really get along all that well internally, as seen in their frequent infighting and turnover of leadership. There's a reason I didn't mention any central figure for the Bullrack, and that's because they have a new one every few days due to constant power struggles. Obviously, that sort of strife will hamper any forward momentum, and rare is the movement that succeeds without solidarity. What's more, the Gruul's tactic of employing brute force in an attempt to improve their situation is obviously far from optimal, and it would be particularly unwise for any real-world progressive movement to choose wanton violence as a central part of its plan. With regards to this point, let's pull up Ravnica Allegiance's Rampage of the Clans. Note that as a story spotlight card, it's tied to a specific event, a riot that Domri incites in order to sow chaos and keep the other guilds at each other's throats. The flavor text gives us a clear idea of what this riot results in. Everything in the clan's path gets crushed, and swaths of the city are rendered useless.
Rage! Rage until the whole world burns!
And that accomplished what exactly? Putting innocent Ravnican citizens out of their homes and making a whole lot of people really, really mad? Great idea, Domri. Just great. Which brings us to our last and most important shortcoming of the Gruul's modus operandi. They have no proposal or suggestion for an alternative to the systems they so hate. No, the plane being reclaimed by nature does not qualify here. That's impractical, given that the vast majority of the plane's inhabitants don't want to see the city laid to waste and everything starting over. So, while a member of the clans might say that their vision of the future aligns with Domri's quote from Ravnica Allegiance's wilderness reclamation, "Walls crack, buildings fall, always the wilds return." I don't buy that. Perhaps the most crucial element for any push towards progress is having real, well-thought-out programs and policies that can take the place of what is being removed. That's why solid proposals for the defunding of police departments are always coupled with arrangements for the training of de-escalation officers and other professionals who can take over the duties of police and carry them out more effectively. That's the sort of thing we need. That's starting to sound like the kind of movement to which we can hitch our wagons. Oh, hey. No, I didn't forget about you, you lovable dumbass. Yes, your time has finally come. Take the stage for a bit. Domri Raid is a Ravnica native who grew up on the streets as an orphan. Despite nobody wanting his scrawny butt, he was drawn to the Gruul way of life. After being turned away by each of the clans, he found companionship with the beasts of the ruins and the rubble belt, and developed a powerful magical kinship with them. When the Orzhov Syndicate pushed into Gruul lands, Domri called a herd of rage beasts to drive them out, earning the respect of Borborygmos and honorary membership with the Burning Tree. Eventually, he reached the age for the Gruul Rite of Passage, which is just being buried alive and forced to claw your way out. So no big deal. Unsurprisingly, the smallish teenager was unable to dig through the layers of dirt that were flung upon him, but his prayers to the old gods for a miracle were answered, in a sense, when he planeswalked for the first time. He ended up on Naya, got saved from a gargantua by a group of Cillian god trackers, started telling them about his home plane, and whoops, planeswalked again, and this time right back to Ravnica. Sometime after that is when we as players were introduced to Domri with his mythic rare printing in Gatecrash. He wasn't much of a presence in the story until the second time we saw him, though. Come Ravnica Allegiance, we got his second printed version in Domri Chaosbringer, and his ascension to Guildmaster after running Borborygmos over with another horde of beasts. From there, he begins to actively incite chaos wherever and however he can. There are a couple juicy quotes that paint his mindset well, the first of which came on Guilds of Ravnica's Street Riot.
They said obey and you'll be happy. They said you'll be safe. But we're not safe. We're not happy.
We will not obey.
Jump to War of the Sparks, Domri's Ambush for more.
When civilization teeters on the brink, I'll be there to kick it the rest of the way.
The angsty teenager in me is giving that the chef's kiss. But back to the topic, and it's convenient we're looking at a War of the Spark card, because that's where Domri meets his tragic, yet hilarious, downfall. As we can see on his third and likely final printed version, the rare Domri Anarchabolus, he eventually decides to support a certain elder dragon, who is hatching a nefarious plan to harvest all the Planeswalker sparks that he can to cast the Elder Spell. Why, exactly, Domri becomes convinced that the way to get what he wants is to actively fight for the big bad, as said villain attempts to wipe out the very subset of beings that Domri belongs to? Well, it's because he's stupid. Just stupid. Unsurprisingly, old Dommy Boy is the first to get snuffed out as Bolus begins his harvest, and thus ends the tale of my favorite planeswalker. Yes, he's an idiot. But he's my idiot. With that silliness done, let's summarize. What we see with the Gruul is a group that we, as progressives, can identify with. They desperately want to improve their lot, but for a long time they've struggled to find the tools or voice to make a better situation for themselves. However, when we examine how the Gruul go about calling for the change they want, their approach is clearly untenable. Not awfully surprising, considering this is a fictional story written for a card game centered on combat, but also informative as we continue to see violence and bitter anger across our nation. To give you the TLDR of what I'm trying to say here, as well as something to ruminate on yourself, the Gruul show the same dogged determination it will take for us to set right even some of the wrongs we see on the news every day. But they lack the cohesion, civility, and thoughtful planning that a realistic movement needs. When it comes down to it, what's going to be more critical than anything else going forward is compassion. That must be what drives us as we march onward. We can be the change that we want to see, but not without the well-being and dignity of those who face oppression at the very top of our list of priorities. Until next time, thank you for sticking through this one with me. Remember to hold love for one another in your heart. See you next time.